Let me tell you something most people never realize. Manipulative people don't enter your life through the front door. They don't knock. They don't announce themselves. They slip in through the cracks you didn't even know were there. And Carl Jung talked a lot about how unconscious patterns shape what we accept, what we ignore, and what we let into our lives without thinking twice. So today, I'm going to walk you through 7 subtle tactics people use to gain access to your world. And trust me, by the time we hit number 7, you'll see why some people feel harmless, until you actually look closer. The first tactic people use to get access to your life is something I call the sudden familiarity trick, and it works because it hits you fast. It's when someone talks to you as if they've known you for months, maybe years, even though the connection is brand new. They use your name casually. They laugh like you've shared a long history. They speak in that warm, confident tone that usually only shows up between people who actually know each other. And here's why it's effective. It feels good. It feels natural. Most people aren't used to being seen or understood so quickly, so when someone jumps straight into that energy, it's disarming. Carl Jung often pointed out how deeply humans crave recognition, whether we admit it or not. That unconscious desire makes sudden familiarity feel comfortable instead of suspicious. But this is the first doorway, because when someone bypasses the normal pace of getting to know you, they're not building trust, they're engineering it. Real closeness takes time. Real connection grows slowly. So if someone's acting like your old friends right out of the gate, it's not a sign of chemistry. It's a sign of strategy. And if you don't notice it early, you'll find yourself giving someone access they didn't earn. The truth is, no one should feel that close to you that quickly. And the moment you feel that rush of instant comfort, that's your signal to step back and ask yourself, did I actually invite this person in? Or did they just let themselves inside? The second tactic people use to gain access to your life is what I call the strategic vulnerability drop. And at first it looks harmless. It even looks honest. It's when someone reveals something deep or personal incredibly early on. So early that you feel a little surprised they'd share it with someone they barely know. But here's what makes this tactic powerful. It plays directly into your instincts. When someone opens up, the natural response is to meet them halfway. You feel almost obligated to match their honesty with your own. It feels balanced. It feels fair. And that's exactly what they're counting on. Carl Jung talked a lot about how people unconsciously mirror each other's emotional states. When someone presents you with vulnerability, your mind wants to reflect it back. It's automatic, and manipulators understand this pattern better than most. They use vulnerability not as a bridge, but as bait. What makes this tactic even more effective is that their vulnerability is controlled. It's rarely something that genuinely risks anything for them. It's usually just emotional enough to seem real, but safe enough that it doesn't actually expose them. Meanwhile, the moment you reciprocate, you're giving them real information. Details about your fears, your triggers, your insecurities, your past experiences, things they can use later to predict how you'll react or to position themselves as someone you need. And here's the twist. They don't force you to open up. They let you feel like you're choosing to. That's what makes it such a clean piece of manipulation. You think you're connecting. You think you're establishing trust. But what's actually happening is a subtle shift in power. They get access to your inner world while revealing almost nothing that could be used against them. The most revealing sign is what happens after. Once you've opened the door, They start referencing the things you told them. They bring them up in ways that make you feel understood, supported, or emotionally aligned. But what they're really doing is reinforcing the illusion that the connection is deeper than it actually is. And the moment you hesitate, pull back, or question something, they'll use that same vulnerability to steer the conversation. They'll remind you of how real things felt. They'll subtly nudge you to keep sharing. They'll act disappointed if you don't trust them back the same way. The third tactic people use to slip into your life is something you'll miss completely if you're not paying attention. It's the compliment hook, and it works because it doesn't just make you feel good, it makes you feel seen. But with manipulators, compliments aren't kindness, they're currency. Here's how it plays out. Someone starts offering you praise that feels perfectly timed. Not too much, not too little. Just enough to hit the exact spot where you've always wanted approval. They highlight your strengths, your choices, your personality, your work ethic. Things you may not hear recognized very often. And because it feels rare, it feels sincere. Carl Jung talked about how the parts of ourselves we don't fully acknowledge often have the strongest pull on us. And that's what makes the compliment hook so effective. It targets the parts of you that want validation, even if you don't admit it out loud. When someone presents praise that aligns exactly with those hidden needs, your guard drops without you even realizing it. But the trick isn't the compliment itself, it's the pattern behind it. Manipulators rarely compliment randomly. They do it right before asking for something, or right after you've done something for them, or right when they sense you're unsure about them. Their praise has a job: to shape your behavior. Compliments become a reward system. Do something they want, they're warm, enthusiastic, appreciative. Pull back. Suddenly, the tone shifts. You'll notice it in moments you didn't even think were important. They might say something like, "You're one of the few people who really understands things." And just like that, you feel chosen. You feel different. And when someone makes you feel that way, it becomes harder to question their intentions. But here's the real test. Stop doing what they expect. Stop being constantly available. Stop agreeing with everything. Stop giving them what they're trying to extract from you. Watch what happens. The compliments dry up. They become shorter, colder, or they vanish completely. Because the praise was never about celebrating you. It was about influencing you. And once you see that shift, you'll realize something important. Genuine compliments don't come with strings attached. They aren't weapons. They aren't strategies. They're just expressions of appreciation, and they don't change based on whether someone gets their way. So the compliment hook works only as long as you're unaware of it. Once you start watching when the praise appears, and when it disappears, you'll notice that some people don't compliment you because they admire you. They compliment you because they're trying to guide you. And the moment you recognize that pattern, the hook loses its hold. The fourth tactic people use to gain access to your life is one of the most convincing, because it feels almost magical when it's happening. It's the "I get you" identity mirror. And on the surface, it just feels like you've finally met someone who's on your wavelength. Someone who understands you without trying. Someone who shares your opinions, your interests, your reactions, your outlook. It feels smooth, natural, effortless. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. Here's how it works. Instead of showing you who they actually are, they reflect you back to yourself. It's not their personality you're bonding with. It's your own. And because most people are rarely truly mirrored in everyday life, this kind of alignment feels powerful. It feels rare. Carl Jung talked a lot about the unconscious pull we feel toward people who seem to reflect parts of us we don't usually see. That mirror effect creates instant rapport, instant comfort, instant trust. But manipulators don't mirror you because they relate to you. They mirror you because it works. They subtly pick up on your tone, your expressions, the way you phrase things. If you're laid back, they're laid back. If you're serious, they're serious. If you express a frustration, they share the exact same frustration. If you mention a preference or principle, they immediately agree, sometimes even amplifying it to look even more aligned than you are. It's engineered compatibility. Over time, this mirroring builds a kind of psychological shortcut. You start thinking, wow, we're so similar, or I feel like I've known this person forever. And once that feeling sets in, people tend to stop questioning intentions. That's the moment access begins. But the real identity of the person behind the mirror doesn't show up until you test the reflection. All you have to do is break the pattern, disagree with them, challenge a point they claimed to share, express a different preference, change your stance, watch what happens. If it was genuine, they stay steady, they stay themselves. But if it was manipulation, the entire act starts to glitch. They become tense, irritated, confused, sometimes defensive, sometimes overly agreeable in a forced way, trying to restabilize the illusion. But sooner or later, the mask slips because they don't actually have a real identity to fall back on in the dynamic. They only had yours. And this is where most people realize what's been happening. That perfect match feeling wasn't compatibility. It was imitation, and not out of admiration, but out of strategy. Here's the part most people overlook. Getting mirrored feels amazing, right up until you realize you've been bonding with a reflection instead of a person. And once you see the illusion for what it is, the connection feels strangely hollow, because there was never a real foundation, just a replica of your own traits. So remember this: real alignment doesn't look perfect. Real compatibility doesn't echo every thought you have. Real people don't mirror your identity. They bring their own. And when someone never disagrees, never diverges, never reveals a contrasting view, that's not closeness. That's choreography. And the moment you recognize the difference, the mirror loses its power. The fifth tactic people use to gain access to your life is something most people mistake for kindness. It's the crisis connection move. And it's effective because it doesn't come across as manipulation at all. In fact, it often looks like the exact opposite. It looks like help. It looks like support. It looks like someone showing up at the perfect moment with the perfect attitude. But the timing is the tactic. This is how it usually plays out. You're stressed, overwhelmed, unsure, or going through something difficult. You're not at your strongest. You're not thinking as clearly. You're looking for stability, and that's when they appear, almost out of nowhere. They show up with a calm tone, the right words, or the right offer of help. They position themselves as the person who just gets it, the one who understands exactly what you're dealing with, the one who can guide you through it. And let's be honest, in those moments, you're more open to letting someone in. Carl Jung often explained how vulnerability activates unconscious patterns of attachment. When someone offers reassurance at the exact moment your defenses are low, your mind can interpret that as trustworthiness, even if the person hasn't actually earned that role. But here's the subtle twist. Manipulators don't show up at random. They show up when your guard is easiest to bypass. Notice the pattern. When things in your life are going well, when you're grounded, confident, or clear-headed, they're often less present, less engaged, or less interested. But the moment you hit a rough patch, they're suddenly attentive, supportive, invested. The timing is too precise to be natural. Their help isn't about your well-being. It's about access. And once they position themselves as your go-to source of support, they gain something incredibly powerful: influence over your emotional environment. If they can be the person you turn to when you're unsure, they can also be the person who steers you, nudges you, or subtly shapes your choices. Not through force, but through dependence. And dependence doesn't have to be dramatic to be effective. It can be quiet, understated, even polite. Here's how you can see the tactic for what it is. Watch what they do after the crisis passes. If they disappear again, if they fade into the background, if their warmth cools, if their interest slows the moment you regain your footing, then their connection wasn't about you. It was about timing their involvement to when you were easiest to influence. Another sign is how they respond when you don't rely on them. If you handle something on your own and they seem disappointed, bothered, or strangely cold about it, that's not support. That's frustration, because their access point didn't open the way they wanted it to. And here's the final layer. Genuine support doesn't need vulnerability to function. True connection doesn't require you to be struggling for someone to show up. Supportive people are consistent. Manipulative people are strategic. So when someone always appears at the exact moment you're weakest, but rarely shows up when you're strong, that's not coincidence. That's calculation. And once you recognize the timing for what it is, you stop confusing crisis closeness with real connection. The sixth tactic people use to gain access to your life is the gradual boundary push. And this one is subtle. It doesn't hit you all at once. It doesn't shove the door open. It takes its time. It gets you used to small steps, and once you're comfortable, it quietly increases the pressure. Here's how it starts, with little requests, tiny things, harmless things, the kind of things that don't even register as favors because they feel so light. A quick ask, a small inconvenience, something you say yes to without thinking twice. And that's the whole point. Those early yeses feel safe. They don't cost much. They don't disrupt your day. They don't trigger your boundaries. But Carl Jung often emphasized that human behavior becomes patterned long before we consciously realize it. And manipulators rely on this. Each time you say yes to a small request, your mind creates a story. This person isn't a problem. This is normal. This is fine. And once that storyline forms, they start to stretch it. The requests begin to evolve, just slightly. The next ask is a little bigger, a little more demanding, a little more personal. But because you've already said yes before, there's pressure, internal pressure, to stay consistent. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want to suddenly change the dynamic. You don't want to make it weird. And that internal discomfort is exactly how your boundaries get bypassed. Manipulators don't rely on one big ask. They build access in layers. They get you used to giving small amounts of time, attention, energy, or favors until it stops feeling like giving. It starts feeling like routine, like part of the relationship, like your responsibility. You'll notice this especially when you try to pull back. The moment you stop saying yes, suddenly you're met with confusion, irritation, guilt-tinged comments, or passive-aggressive reactions. That reaction isn't random. It's a signal that they were never interested in balance. They were interested in compliance. Here's the tricky part. The gradual boundary push is easy to rationalize. You tell yourself, it's not a big deal, or it's only this once, or they probably just need help. But the frequency and the escalation tell the truth. The asks increase. The expectations grow, and the more access they get, the more they expect. Notice the shift. In the beginning, they asked. Later, they assume. Eventually, they demand, without ever actually demanding. That's the final stage of this tactic. Manipulators eventually act as if the access they slowly gained is now something you owe them, something built into the connection, something they're entitled to. And if you push back, they make you feel like you're the one breaking some unspoken agreement. But the reality is simple. You never agreed to anything. You were eased into it. The strongest warning sign is this. If someone's requests grow in size or frequency over time, and your yeses feel less voluntary and more expected, you're not dealing with a normal dynamic. You're dealing with a system, one designed to stretch your boundaries until you don't recognize them anymore. And the moment you see the pattern, you take back control. You stop mistaking slow pressure for closeness. You stop thinking you're obligated because you said yes before. And you realize the truth. Access given slowly is still access, and you're allowed to close the door whenever you decide to. The seventh tactic people use to gain access to your life is the most subtle of them all. It doesn't rely on persuasion. It doesn't rely on convincing arguments or charisma or charm. It relies on silence. Or more specifically, the emotional tension created by silence. I call it the silent pressure game. Here's how it works. Instead of directly asking for something, they shift their behavior just enough to make you feel uneasy. They don't lecture you. They don't confront you. They don't even explain what's wrong. They just pull back a little. Their tone changes. Their energy shifts. They act a bit distant, a bit disappointed, a bit withdrawn, and you feel it instantly. Most people are sensitive to social cues, even if they don't consciously analyze them. Carl Jung often pointed out that subtle emotional signals trigger old psychological patterns formed long before you were aware of them. So when someone you've let into your life suddenly changes their tone or energy, your instincts kick in. You want to fix it. You want the tension gone. You want things back to normal. And that's exactly what the manipulator is counting on. This tactic works because it flips the roles. Now you're the one doing the work. You're the one trying to guess what they want. You're the one adjusting your behavior to make them comfortable again. You're the one moving closer without them having to say a single word. The silence becomes the pressure. You'll notice it in moments when you assert a boundary. They might suddenly become less warm. They might reply more slowly. They might stop initiating. They might give short answers instead of engaging. They may even sigh, pause, or give a long stretch of quiet when you say something they don't like. What they're really communicating is, you didn't give me what I wanted, and now you have to earn your way back. But here's where the tactic really takes hold. Once they see that you respond to their silence, they start using it predictably every time you do something they don't like. Set a boundary, say no, question something. They dial back their presence. And every time you fold to their unspoken expectations, the warmth returns. And because nothing is said out loud, you can't point to a specific moment and say, this is manipulation. You just feel the emotional pressure, and you react to it. Once you see the patterns, manipulators lose their power, and the people who belong in your life become crystal clear.